People already took this, the main idea.
The main idea. Yeah. People took the main idea. Okay, so thanks for coming back after the emergency. It looks like we lost some people in the emergency. At least they were lost knowing the most important idea about how to give a talk, so they can tell people who are going to give talks in heaven. And a good slide has to have the premise written in the top. And in my lab, even though we discuss at every group meeting, it's very natural to forget sometimes. And so we stop and ask the lab, can you suggest a premise for this slide? Very friendly way, because we are all examples of case studies for a wider tendency. So, I'm going to write, this is our slide that we're working on. And we figured out to write time on the x-axis and velocity on the y-axis. And I'm writing on the top of the slide, velocity versus time. Is this a good premise?
Yes.
How can we know it's not a good premise automatically? It's not a so what's a good premise here? That's right. The premise here is, as you said, is velocity increases with time. That's the reason I'm showing you this graph, is to pass the idea that velocity increases with time. It's a very simple idea, right? It's not so simple in every slide, so sometimes it requires some thought, but this thought that you make before you give the presentation is going to make it much, much more clear to the audience what you want to say. Another kind of expectation that makes people afraid a little bit of doing this is, if I tell them the answer, there won't be any suspense in this slide. But from my experience, it's good just to say the main idea, not does velocity, what happens to velocity, question mark. But velocity increases with time. People get it, and they can look at you, relax, they've got the idea, less stress and less barriers to overcome to pass your idea. So every slide should have a full sentence at the top, which is the one idea. This is all you need to know on how to prepare the talk. But I'll say a few more things that are kind of fine-tuning. What happens if you prepare a talk without thinking of the premise beforehand? This isn't so rare. I'd say at least half of the talks you hear are talks where the author wasn't thinking of the premise ahead of time. These are talks where you see a mass of data, gel, and in the end, you don't remember what was happening. If you don't choose a premise, then usually the talk chooses a premise for itself. And the premise is something like, I'm trying to impress you that I did a lot of work. That's many talks are like this. And very experienced speakers in conferences, I would say about 50%, don't know about this little technique. And if they did know about this technique, the life would be better for all of us. It's just a technique. What else can you do before you give the talk? So I recommend to my students to learn by heart the first 5 sentences. We all have stage fright. Stage fright is the fear to be shamed publicly. It's a paralyzing fear for most people. That's why giving a talk for most people is like, it's not a pleasant thought ahead of time, even though with time you get used to it and it becomes a pleasant experience. I can tell you if you do this. So learning by heart the first 5 sentences is wonderful, because when you're presented and you're going to give the talk, and the fear is the highest right before you start speaking, and it goes away after 5 sentences. You don't fear anything. So that's the good news. And it's very good to remember the first 5 sentences of your talk. The second thing to do is to practice the talk so that you chew the text, what's called in theater. So the words sit in your mouth. If you just try to give the talk for the first time, you'll see that you say everything twice in different ways. If you practice it a few times, you chew the text, and you have the one way of saying it that's most effective. Preparing your talk. Remember to finish ahead of time. This is really crucial. Why is it so crucial? Just imagine the audience, how they feel if the talk ends ahead of time, how do you feel? Usually happy. That's what we want. We want to give a talk like we would want to hear. Basically, the golden rule or the platinum principle. Don't do unto others what you don't want others to do to you, for example. So that means you have to plan the talk to be about 2/3 of the time that you're given. That means really work on the premise, because usually you can throw away most of the stuff you want to talk about and keep what's relevant to the premise, making your talk have more artistic unity, one premise. Talks with two premises are difficult to understand. I mean, you have to be very, very skilled. And talks with more than two premises are, I think, impossible, even for the great Roman orators 2,000 years ago. Couldn't pull it off. And they wrote about their technique. That was a major thing to learn then. As a young man or woman, only man, who wants to get ahead in the governing world, speaking publicly. An art form, it's a technique they studied and were very effective at, and that's what we need to do. I'll tell you their secrets in the next part, how to give the talk. But now we're preparing for the talk. About introductions, some people say, the audience knows this already, I'm not going to put it in my talk. Remember how pleasant it is to hear about things that you know already. It's very pleasant. So please put in long introductions. Who came? Tali came. Good. It's pleasant to know about issues that you already know. So Tali, you missed the first part, how to prepare. But I'll give you a private lesson afterwards. The talk has arrived, and now we have to present it as a human being with a body in front of other human beings that have bodies. And again, like I said in my talks before, science we think of as objective, rational, and done with the mind. So a lot of talks you pretend that all you need to do is pass information at a rapid rate into the minds of the robot sitting next to you. It could be dark, it could be nobody can see each other, the PowerPoint is bright, it's good, the information is going in. And that's a basic assumption made, unfortunately, in the way people design conferences and talks, because we don't think that it's, of course, objective and rational. It's also subjective, emotional, and we have bodies. So, for example, I asked to open the windows behind us. How does that make you feel? The windows are open now. Let's say that we can see each other. Seeing each other reduces the stress and reduces the barriers for comprehension. So the setting is very important. Ideally, in theater nowadays, we know that curved rows in light is the best, because you don't build the artificial fourth wall between the actors and the stage. When you see each other, you realize that you're not alone. You're not atoms competing with each other. You're part of a group of people listening to a speaker. Right? So the setting is very important. So think about the setting if you have a chance. The setting in this talk is really very good. Look how, instead of, a lot of times I would be standing here, and you would be in rows like this. And now we're so close to each other, I can see each one of you, it's light, and you can see each other. The setting, because we're people with bodies.